Okay, so now that I showed you how to add static meshes to your level, you can essentially make the static objects of your level, and you can create the visual look, the components on the level that do not change. However, to create a very nice map, you would like to add advanced topics and advanced tools and objects into your level. So your level would be more engaging, and it would look a lot more realistic. And also you want the levels to also act and be interactive. So the two topics that we will cover in this third component of the video for this unit are particle systems as special effects in your level, as well as adding interactors or objects essentially that you could interact with, and we see how we can use the scripting, visual scripting Kesmet, and the cinematic event organizer Matinee within Unreal to do these special effect things. Basically, what we are going to do here now is we will set up our particle system first. Now, to set up your particle system, if you open up your content browser, you will see that in package U2 that we have, I clicked on all types, and you see that you have all different kinds of objects, from materials to textures to physical materials and static meshes and so forth. So one of these types of materials is basically particle systems, and the particle systems have already been set up, 4 of them, for your review, or essentially to start up. But I'll show you how you can create these particle systems from scratch, and we'll just go ahead and create one from scratch right now, and then later on towards the end of the semester we'll actually study how particle systems are set up. Now, to create a new content within your asset manager or the package here, you can just go ahead and right click somewhere in the gray area, and then a menu pops up and allows you to add new assets to your system, and we want to use new particle systems. So click on new particle systems, and you're within U02 package is the one that I had created, and then I want to put this particle system into the grouping called particles, which is down here, and then give the name my underscore particle steam, and because we are within the particle factory, the factory that creates and organizes this asset is basically your particle system factory. And then when you're done with naming of your particle, then press OK. This will essentially create your particle system and particle object, and the Unreal Cascade editor, particle editor, will open up. We call this editor just particle cascade system. Now I'm going to minimize this, and I'm going to close the content browser. Actually, I'm going to open the content browser, and then I'm going to click on my particle steam, which is the one that I just created, and then I will add it to my level just to see how it looks like. Right click and then click add emitter, particle emitter, and then move it. Oh, I haven't saved this particle system. So this particle system essentially that we created is using all the default values, and so this doesn't look the way that we want it to look. Okay, so next we open up the particle system, close the content browser, and next let's apply the material to your particle system here. Click on the particle emitter node, and when you click on it on this upper quadrant of the Cascade editor, you'll see the particle emitter turns orange. That indicates that this particle emitter has been selected. In order to apply the material to this particle, you need to click on the required section of your particle emitter, and then if everything is closed, then you need to open the emitter tab, and then you'll see the option material. Right now, the material that is applied to the particle system here is from the material engine of Unreal. It's called default particle, which are those cross materials that you see here in the viewport. Now, in order to apply a material, you need to select that material from the content browser and then add the material by clicking on Use Selected Object in Content Browser. So open up the content browser, click on the Materials section, and then click on Material Steam. That's a material that's already been created for you. And when you click on it and highlight it, then click Use Selected Object in Content Browser, and then the material will be applied to your particle emitter. Now go ahead and play your level, and now you see that your particles material, instead of that blue, green, orange material, is now the steam material, which is some sort of transparent steam and smoky kind of material that is applied. Now, to make the particle emitter look realistic, we need to set a few of the properties of the emitter so that the behavior of this system would look right. So right now we are in the particle emitter, and within the emitter, let's add a few options that we already have. Click on the spawn, and then under the spawn rate, change the spawn rate from 20 to 25, and this will make sure that under the distribution, every second you will have 25 particles emitted within the geometry. We can keep all the other options the same, and then click on the required section, click on emitter to expand it, to close it, click on sub UV, and then from the interpolation mode, select linear blend. Because your particle is made up of sub-images, this way you can linearly blend the 4 images, because you have 2 images along the X and 2 images along the Y axis on your particle material. So after you choose the interpolation method, linear blend, then increase the sub-image horizontal and the sub-image verticals to 2, and this way you can essentially tell your particle system that you have a 2x2 grid of materials for your particle. So here's how your particle essentially blended together would look like. Okay, now at this point you can save your package. So let's open particle emitter, content browser, and save the package, and then we will go ahead and play the level. So here is how your particle system now looks like. So it's now a lot more realistic looking. Now we will set up a few more of the properties of your particle emitter, and try to make our particle emitter system look the way that we want it to appear in our level. So we will change the lifetime of our emitted particles into the view. So click on the lifetime module. When it's selected, it turns orange. Expand the lifetime tab, and then under the lifetime distribution, change the minimum lifetime distribution to 1.25 and change the maximum distribution to 2.0. This essentially gives a random behavior to our particles. Some of them that are emitted would last 1.25 seconds, and some of them will last all the way up to 2 seconds. This way, your particle or the way that the smoke is sent out of the end of the pipe will not always end at a certain distance from the pipe, and so this would give that randomness illusion, basically a random range, to the lifespan of your particles. Next, you want to kind of change the sizes of your particles that are emitted and make them also random. So back under the particle emitter, click on the initial size module, and then let's set their properties. Click on start size, and then under the distribution, as you see down here, we will go to maximum and change the maximum size along the X, Y, and Z to 150 units, and you can easily see the instant change of the sizes that of the particles that are created. So their maximum size is going to be 150 units, and then under the distribution we'll go to minimum size and change the minimum sizes to 75 units, and this way the small materials that are created will be given a random size between 75 to 150 units. Then we'll change the velocity of your particles. So click on the initial velocity under the particle emitter module. Click on the velocity, and then we will set up the starting velocity under the distribution. For the maximum, we'll give it 40, and for the minimum, we'll give it -20 and -20 along the X and Y directions, and 175 along the Z direction, and for the maximum along the Z direction, we'll give it 200. So the values will be maximum values X, Y, and Z are 40, 40, and 200. Minimum for X, Y, and Z are -20, -20, and 175. This way, you'll get your particle system's random behavior. So far, we have manipulated the particle, essentially, behavior from the modules that were pre-built. And here is a view of the level. Let's build the lighting. Now let's go on and play with a few new modules that we can create for our particle system in the Cascade Particle Editor, and make some more modifications to the particle system. And we allow the particle system, each sub-image of the particle system, to use different kind of textures in its lifespan. Open your generic browser and open up the Cascade Editor, and then close generic browser. And the Cascade Editor that I just opened up, it's basically the particle emitter that I have already created. Okay, now here what we have in the modules in the particle system are required modules, spawn module, lifetime, initial size, and so forth. If you right click under the gray area, a bunch of other submodules are created or are there that you can add to your particle system. We add a sub UV and a sub image index module. So here are our sub image index modules that we are adding to our particle system. So we select the sub image index module, and then under the sub image index you'll see the distribution category, and open up the distribution category, and then click on the little blue arrow icon that appears at the far right hand side of the distribution. That would allow you to add special kinds of variables to your module. So we choose the float constant curve and add this constant curve to your distribution. When you do this, and a curve is added to your distribution, which would allow you to control how the images of the particle blend to each other. To control this curve, you add basically points or control points at the beginning and the end of your curve, and your particle cascade system would take care of blending of the materials. So now the constant curve is already expanded, and you see that there are no points added to it. That's why you see that the particle images are basically moving around, but the blending is done in a predeterministic way. click on the add new items twice, and this adds 2 points to your item. So you have point 0, then you have point 1. So point 0, go ahead and change its in value to 1.0 and out value to 3.0. Actually, leave the point 0 at 0 and then go to point 1 and change its in value and out value to 1.0 and 3.0. So this would create a curve on which your sub images will be blended. Next, at the bottom of your particle emitter, right click and choose size, and then size by life. And when you apply the size by life, you essentially will tell your particle systems to change their size over time after their creation. Okay. Now go to the distribution category and then click on the create new object icon, and then create the distribution vector constant curve. And this will create a curve, constant curve, and then you can add several points as your textbook actually wants you to create. It is essentially a curve with 4 points, and you would have to just add the properties from the textbook to get the exact look of your curve that controls the size of each particle over their lifetime. Create 4 points, point 0 to 4. For the point 0, you change the out value x, y, and z to point 2, and point 2, okay, and leave the in value at 0. Go to point 1, change its in value to point 6, and change its out value to 1.5 along x, y, and z. And then for point 2, its in value is 85, and out value is going to be 0.75. And finally, for point 3, your in value is going to be set at 1.5. Now you can save this particle system by opening your content browser and saving your package. And if you play the level, you'll see that your particle system looks a lot more random, with a much more interesting blending of the sub images. Now we already have added our particle system in here, so we just make a bit of a change to its orientation property for it to look as if the smoke is emitting out from the pipe. And when you're satisfied with the orientation of the smoke, then you can just simply save your package, save your map. And so this is how the particle system now looks like, set up in the game. Save the package. Alright, now that we have set up our particle system, one more thing is left in this level to kind of make it look really nice and playable, and that is to place a door for the doorway between the two rooms, and then make it open when the players get close to the door. And this brings us to the next advanced topics and tools in Unreal Development Kit, which has to do with the visual scripting language called Kismet and the matinee sequence editing tool. First thing is to put a door mesh in the doorway, and then set up a trigger that we can use to initiate the movement of the door. So how can you do this? In Unreal, as I showed you, you can add static meshes to your environment. And these static meshes, when you add them, they're basically three-dimensional models, and they will not move in the scene. There's a counterpart to static meshes, and that's called an interpactor. and we can use those interpactor, which are based on static meshes, and or essentially three-dimensional models that you import and include in your level. But then you can script them, you can make them move around. So to do that, we'll open the content browser, and then from the package that we have been using, we can click on static meshes, and then you see that there's a static mesh here for the doorway, for the door, and it's called SM_door. And click on it, and then inside the level, right click, and then you will have a bunch of actors that you can add, and in this case we want to add an interfactor based on the static mesh that we have. So instead of adding a static mesh, we'll add just an interfactor. Now this actor is added to your level. Now we move it around and we place it in the initial location of this object. So now the door has been placed, and we can build our lighting and play the level. So here is the door, but as you noticed here, I can actually go through the door. It's because this actor that I just placed, it doesn't have any collision set up with it, so the objects can pass through it. Now the next step is to add some collisions to this object. Now choose the object or the interpactor here, and then press F4, and that opens your dynamic static mesh actor here. Now, under your dynamic static mesh, let's suppose that everything is closed. Okay, now let's suppose that all these tabs are closed. We will just click on the collision tab, and then from the collision type, as you see here, the collision is not selected, so there's no collision for this object. We can click collide block all, and this will block all the weapons. I mean, all the objects after colliding with this object. Then close the properties, and then play the level one more time. And now you see the object or the player will not be able to move through the door, and also it will not allow the bullets and the weapon fires to go through the door. The next step is to actually have the door open when the player gets close to the door. Now to do this, we will use a scripting language or the visual scripting tool called Kismet, and Kismet is on top here. So click on Kismet, the Kismet main sequence will open, and we can write our program in here. And the program is visual programming, so we can use blocks and add these blocks to our program. So the next step is to put a trigger in our level so that it could activate a sequence for our objects. So right click somewhere in the level, and then from the actor, click on Add Actor, and then Add Trigger. This will add the trigger in our system, and then I will just place the trigger in the middle of the door. And so what it does is that I write up a program that starts with the player touching the trigger, and when the trigger is touched, then we write up a sequence that moves the door and basically opens the door. So while the trigger is selected, click on the Unreal Kismet and open the Kismet, and then right click on the gray area, and then choose New Event using Trigger 1. When you move your mouse over the new event, another window opens up, and then based on what happens to Trigger 1, which is the trigger that we created here, or basically Trigger 0, you could initiate a sequence. So we use a touch event. So we start an event if Trigger 1 is touched. If you notice at the touch trigger here, there are a bunch of components, and one of the components is called maximum trigger count. Right now it's set at 1, so it only works once when the trigger is touched, and if you retouch the trigger, nothing will happen. In order to make this trigger stay forever in your level, you make the maximum trigger at 0, and if once you put your maximum trigger at 0, then whenever the trigger is touched, there won't be any maximum count on it, so the sequence that you have started up, it will run. Okay, so right now if you play the level, you will not be able to see any difference because the trigger is touched, but nothing is going to happen after the trigger is touched. Now one of the things that I can do here is to create a log for this trigger. So I right click a new action, then from the miscellaneous you can add a log, and then you can write something on the screen. For example, write trigger is touched, whenever the trigger is touched. But we're not going to go to the details of these, and I will basically show you more sequences in Kismet a bit later in the semester. But right now we want to make the door, when the trigger is touched, the door to move away, to open. And to do that, we can use the matinee editor. Click on the door in your level, and then right click somewhere in the editor, and then you see a bunch of new options appear. Click on New Matinee. When you click on New Matinee, basically, the matinee sequence editor will open, and you can make changes to the dynamic objects in the scene within the matinee and direct those changes and play the changes after the trigger is touched. So the changes that we will be playing is that when the trigger is touched, we will play a matinee sequence, which in turn will move the object out of the way. So click the move your mouse over the touched output of the trigger, and while you're holding the left mouse button, move to play, and then click on play. And then when the trigger is untouched, you reverse the matinee sequence. So far, our basic is set up. We have a trigger in the level, which is placed in the middle of the door. When a player touches the trigger, then a matinee sequence will run. And when the player moves away from the trigger, the matinee sequence will reverse. And the sequence that we will be using is basically a movement of the door from its current location to a location where it has to be after the door is opened. So double click on matinee, and then the matinee editor will open. Now in the matinee editor, at the bottom left corner here, you see a gray area, and that's where you can add matinee groups in. If you right click on the gray area, you'll see a bunch of different groups open. You can add a new group. You can add a camera group when you're creating cinematics. We'll talk about that later. You can add particle groups, skeletal mesh for animations. You can add lighting groups, AI groups, and director groups for directing a little cinematic movie in your game. So click on New Empty Group and call it Door Movement. Now your new group is added to the scene, and then you can make all of the events and the sequences that you want to be visible in the scene within this movement group. Now notice when you added your new group, if you had already selected the door, a new interp actor will be added as the input variable to your matinee in the Kismet. If you haven't done so, you would have to right click on the door movement group input and then add your object manually. So back in the matinee, right click on the door movement group, and then you see that you can add a bunch of different tracks in this group, and you can have event tracks, special effects tracks, animation control tracks, and different kinds of objects and tracks. One of the tracks that you want to use here, actually the only one track that you want to use, is called a movement track, because we are moving the interp actor after this matinee sequence is created. So click on the movement track, and then you see that you will have to the right of this the editor or the movement track, you'll see the sequence, and it is right now set up to run for 1 second. And so right now at the beginning of the sequence, you will see a red triangle, and that's your keyframe or your key movement, which is key movement 0. When you select the key movement, you'll see that your key movement in the perspective editor has been selected, and at the bottom right corner it says adjust key movement 0. Now when the trigger is touched, we want the door to be where it is, which is at keyframe 0. Now we want to move our time to 1 second, which is the end of the sequence here. Okay, and when your time is at 1 second, at the bottom time slider down here, which is this black line, you can press enter, and that will add a new frame. And when you look at the new frame, keyframe, in the perspective editor, at the bottom left corner it says adjust key movement 1. So What you need to do is to move the door out of the way at the keyframe 1. So we move the door out of the way, and then we press enter. That adds our keyframe. Now move the time slider back and forth, as you see here, and in the perspective viewport you see that your door moves out of the way. Okay, you can run a loop for the section, and here's how your movement works. Okay, let's stop and then close the matinee editor and close the Kismet. If you have set up this event properly, when you get close to the door, you touch the trigger. Where the trigger is touched, the matinee sequence runs. The matinee sequence runs and pushes the door out of the way, and then when you move out, the trigger is untouched, and so your sequence would have to reverse. And as you see here, the sequence reverses and the door closes. So when you touch the trigger, the door opens. Basically, your matinee sequence runs. And when you untouch the trigger, the door closes. Basically, the matinee sequence reverses. Door opens, door closes. Door opens, door closes. So with this, I've showed you a bunch of basic stuff in using your Unreal Development Kit to create game levels, and you can use these techniques, and we will delve into each of these techniques during this semester, and we'll learn about the details of all these mechanisms and how they essentially can be used to create really nice looking levels. There are other tutorials in the class, and one of the tutorials deals with adding physics to your game. I will not go over that tutorial in this lecture, so leave that as the component of your mini assignment that you will need to finish up until next week. And with this, I will close up this week's lecture in this unit, and we will start learning the details about creating and designing geometry of your level in the next learning unit. Thank you very much. Bye now.